Okay, so that hopefully gives a flavour of what RL is about. And I don't want you to think that RL is just about games, but actually a lot of my background in reinforcement learning has been on applying reinforcement learning to games, to board games, to video games, and I think they're kind of fun to talk about. So, some of the examples will be drawn from my experience, and so I really want you to see this as just examples of how RL can be applied, and in that sense games are just like little microcosms of real things which happen in the real world, which have very clearly defined rules and help us to understand how these ideas can be applied. So don't think it's just a game-specific idea, it's very generally applicable. Okay, so let's talk now about the reinforcement learning problem. So any questions first about, before we move on? I think we'll start to get into more details and understand things a bit more clearly in just a second. Yeah?
Just on the Atari games thing, do you use what it learns on one game and then sort of transfer that knowledge to a different game, or is it starting fresh each time?
It starts fresh each time.
Right.
Okay, so the RL problem. So one of the most fundamental quantities in reinforcement learning we're just going to talk about in a bit more detail now, and this is the idea of rewards. So a reward, what is it? Well, it's just a number. It's a scalar feedback signal, this random variable RT. So every time step t, we're going to define this feedback signal, RT, saying basically how well is the agent doing at that time step. And the job of the agent is basically to get as many, to sum up these RTs and get as much reward as possible in total. That's what the agent's goal is. And so, is this really a good way to understand what we mean by goals? Does this cover what we mean by goals in all kinds of different problems? Well, what we follow in reinforcement learning is kind of based on the following premise, which is a hypothesis, if you like, informally, which is that all goals can be described by the maximization of expected cumulative reward. So there's nothing that we mean by goal following which can't be described by some scalar feedback signal and the maximization of that feedback signal over time into the future. So, that's a little bit controversial. So you should think about that. Do you agree with it? What do people think? Is this something you agree with? We're certainly going to be following that and using that as the premise for the remainder of the course. But it's okay if you've got, in the back of your mind, well, really? Can you do this, this, or this? So just have a think about that for a second. Any thoughts? Do people object? Are they happy? I'll take silence as happiness.
Just at the end of the game? There's no intermediate reward. How would you wouldn't be able to use reinforcement learning where that was the case, would you?
So intermediate rewards are fine? Or
no intermediate rewards. It's all at the end. So
okay.
You don't know anything until you get to the end.
That's absolutely fine. So that just means that we're defining the goal then. So if there's no intermediate rewards, is the question, what happens? And then in that case, what we define is that we define an end of episode, and we define a reward at the end of the episode. And now the sum of the rewards is exactly how well you do at the end of that episode. And the goal of the agent is to pick action so as to maximize that expected sum of rewards at the end of the episode.
So what if the goal is, say, to pass some sort of challenge within the shortest amount of time? So it's...
Okay, so the question was, what about if it's a time-based goal, like if the goal is to try and do something in the shortest amount of time? So typically what we do there is we define the reward signal to be -1 per time step. And then again, there's a termination of the episode at the end of when you actually achieve your goal, you stop. And now it's a well-defined objective to maximize your cumulative reward, basically minimizes the time that it takes to reach goal.